So thank you everybody for coming. My name is Betsy Vandercook. I am the co-chair of the Education Committee of Network 49, which is the 49th Ward's progressive, independent political organization. Our EdCom has long fought against privatization in education, but for us, that meant really keeping charters out of Rogers Park, most notably Noble Charter. But thank you so much for coming. We know people are anxious about other things tonight too, like, the Georgia Senate race, but there will be plenty of time after the forum. It's not going to be a long forum to catch up. But for this hour, we are going to focus on Illinois' tax credit voucher program, Invest in Kids. Really? Investing in kids? And to explain to you how it came about, how it works, and how we're going to make it end as soon as possible, our two wonderful friends from Illinois Families for Public Schools. This is the group that fought against these vouchers since 2017 and is leading the charge now. We are so proud to be working with them. First is Diane Horwitz. She is on the board of Illinois Families, coordinates issue forums for the DePaul College of Education. She's a retired IFT member, a longtime teacher, and yes, has a PhD in education. Cassie Creswell is the director of Illinois Families for Public Schools and also the co-chair of the National Parent Coalition of Student Privacy. She's been advocating on public ed issues in Chicago since 2010 and recently concluded a term as chair of the LSC, a thankless job. I'm on a LSC too, for the Chicago Public High School that her child attends. She lives in Hyde Park, but with Zoom, she could be anywhere. Also helping us are Samay Gawala. He's the assistant director of Illinois Families. He's working with Jen Jones and Rose Colasino. They're all working on monitoring the chat, and we'll be bringing questions then back to Cassie and Diane after they have their presentation. Another assisting person, Lois Lagai from our Network 49. And last but not least, Michael Harrington is our Zoom host of the evening and co-chair of Network 49. And this is a perfect opportunity to plug a forum that he is chairing tomorrow night at 6:30, the 24th Police District Council Candidate Endorsement Session. It's kind of a mouthful. But if you do live in Rogers Park or West Ridge or the northern end of Edgewater, you are in the 24th Police District. And this is something you really want to attend to get to meet some of the candidates. Michael, I believe I hope you can put the registration link in the chat.
I will put the link in the chat, and I hope everybody makes time to join us. It'll be a good opportunity to meet the three candidates we're recommending to be in charge of improving public safety and police oversight in our community. I'll put the link in the chat. Please register. Thank you, Betsy.
Please do. Please do. Okay, and finally, one more time, if you just joined us, you put your name in the chat too, organization if it's appropriate, and if possible, then the state rep and state senator that represent you. That would be terrific. But now, after that little introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Diane and Cassie for their presentation. Please note, with this size group, we're keeping the mute on for folks. So as they talk and you have comments or questions, please put them in the chat. And then when we're done, we will start pitching them to our speakers. Okay, Cassie, Diane, take it away.
Thanks, Betsy. I'll just share my screen, Diane, and then you can start.
Okay. So while she's sharing her screen, I just want to say thanks a lot to Betsy and to Network 49 for all the work in putting this together, and all the other sponsoring organizations as well. So I'm going to begin, and then Cassie's going to take over the main part of this. And what I want to do is kind of set the Invest in Kids Act in a larger context. So if you go back to the first slide, you can see that we're calling this Backdoor Vouchers. Where did that come from? We think it's a really good slogan. It came from then candidate Pritzker when he was first running for governor, 2017, 2018, when asked about the Invest in Kids Act that got passed during the Rauner administration. He said, that's just a backdoor voucher. So we agree with him, and I hope he continues. We hope that he continues to feel that that way. So next slide, Cassie. So what I want to talk about is that We see this Invest in Kids program as really part of a larger and national push to privatize our public schools. For quite a while now, for many years, decades, there's been a push by organized groups to absolutely discredit public schools, public education, to push to defund it, and really ultimately to dismantle public education. So school voucher programs, Invest in Kids, is just one tool in a larger privatization school box. So for example, next slide, you may have seen these slogans recently that are being promoted, and you probably have seen them on TV: school choice, education, parent rights. And I'm going to give you 3 examples. One is you can read this yourself, from the Illinois Federation of Children Lobbyists. The Illinois Federation for Children is a spinoff or an affiliate of the larger American Federation for Children, run by Betsy DeVos, whose name you all know as the polarizing education secretary during the Trump administration. So in looking at this, you can kind of see where their mindset is and where they want to go. They are strong, strong supporters of Invest in Kids. The next group is Awake Illinois. They have not only taken a strong stand for Invest in Kids, but they're the group that have been operating in Illinois, among other things, besides that. And that includes an end to COVID mitigation, book bans, preventing schools or asking schools not to teach quote unquote critical race theory and so forth. And then the very last group, Moms for Liberty, which you have probably read about in terms of the DeSantis campaign and the Youngkin campaign as well, very active in that, and they have now come into Illinois. We also just want to recommend a really good book for those of you who are interested in the bigger picture, not just vouchers, but this whole attempt that I've just mentioned to dismantle public education. It's A Wolf at the Schoolhouse Door. If you have a book group, you should read it. Jack Schneider, an education professor, and Jennifer Berkshire, a prominent education investigative reporter. It'll give you a really good sense of what this move to privatize our public schools is all about. So next, you probably know that this is also a national privatization strategy. While the very first voucher program was developed many years ago, 1990 in Milwaukee, it has grown by leaps and bounds. These statistics come from 2 places. EdChoice, which is a school choice organization, and the Education Commission of the States. Both of these are from 2021. So it's slightly out of date. And if you look at what just happened in the last year, 2 of these programs, the Tax Credit Scholarship Program and the Education Savings Account, are growing by leaps and bounds. Who is pushing this? Who is this for? Next slide, Cassie. Okay, who are supporting these voucher programs in Illinois and really around the country? So on the left-hand side of the screen, you will see many familiar names, some operating nationally, like the Heritage Foundation, ALEC, American Legislative Education or Exchange Council. There in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see the logo from the Illinois Federation for Children. And some of these are just local, like the Illinois Policy Institute. I want to call your attention to Empower Illinois, which is a pro-voucher, pro-privatization organization. And later on, we're going to be talking about scholarship granting organizations as part of Invest in Kids, and Empower is really the major one. So what do all those groups have in common? Conservative ideologues, anti-government, anti-union, anti-public goods. On the other hand, on the very right-hand side, we have groups in Illinois who really were instrumental in supporting and pushing Invest in Kids when it first began in 2017. These are groups that really aren't ideologically interested in privatization of public ed, as the groups on the left, but they're very interested in getting public dollars to fund their private schools. And I just want to mention here that 95% of the voucher money in Illinois are going to religious schools, 95%. Vast majority are Catholic schools, but there are other Christian schools as well. And one thing that I've learned recently is that 20% of that 95% are going to maybe 7 or 8 Jewish Orthodox schools, primarily located in West Rogers Park and Skokie. So we have the conservative ideologues and these religious organizations among the groups that are supporting with lots of money and lots of organization. Okay, just a couple more before I turn this over to Cassie. Next slide, Cassie. I just want to mention also that I've been sort of talking about these different kinds of voucher programs. They're all different in terms of how they operate. On the other hand, they are all the same because they all decrease public funds available for public schools. They all use public tax dollars to subsidize a family's choice to send their child to a private rather than public school. We have traditional vouchers, ESAs, we have education savings accounts. Illinois has something called an education expense tax credit, but we have this fourth kind, the tax credit scholarship, where a business or individual can contribute any amount of money to a middleman organization or a scholarship granting organization, as they're called here, and then they distribute scholarships or vouchers. The contributors then get tax credits for the amount they contribute. And the next 2 slides, Cassie, are just little illustrations of the difference between a traditional voucher program, which we don't have, where the tax revenue, here's a contributor, is directly appropriated to vouchers that then pay the cost at private schools for private school students. But the next one, our tax credit scholarship, is slightly different. The tax payments, as I mentioned before, are diverted to a middleman, the SGO, scholarship granting organization, that then pays the cost of private schools. And the contributor's tax bill is reduced in proportion to the amount given to the scholarship granting organization. And Cassie is going to take over and talk about why this middleman is part of the program.
Thanks, Diane. So you might ask yourself, why do you need to introduce this complex middleman structure? And really the purpose it's serving is a way to circumvent the separation of church and state. So we know that we have the First Amendment, where Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And we also, in Illinois, we have Article 6, Section 3 in our Constitution, saying that we shouldn't be using public funds for religious purposes. And so by creating this tax credit scholarship structure, you kind of have essentially a plausible deniability that the government is using funds for sectarian purposes, because the funds are being routed through the scholarship granting organization. And as an extra bonus, the framing tax credit scholarship is very positive. Who could be against things like scholarships? And so the truth is, though, legally, these are not donations. So this is a quote from a recent legal case that has not been settled yet. It's under appeal in Kentucky. And they have a similar tax credit scholarship program here. The judge in this case says that this funding mechanism is not a donation in any meaningful sense of that word. It's not a voluntary contribution of personal business income. Taxpayers are not donating their own money to these scholarship granting organizations. They're taking the money they owe to the state and they're redirecting it. And so this is not the same thing as when you make a donation to, say, a private school that's a 501c3 nonprofit, and then you can take a deduction on your federal income tax. Here in Illinois, you get a 75% tax credit, not just a deduction. And so it's not the same as a donation to a 501c3. So I'll just go kind of a little overview of the basics of what the Invest in Kids Act was. So the tax credit scholarship in Illinois, that program is called the Invest in Kids Act, or it was established by the Invest in Kids Act in 2017. This was part of the compromise that solved the budget standoff when Governor Rauner was in office, where we didn't have a state budget for a couple of years. And it also was passed as part of the compromise that created a new state funding formula for K-12 education. So you'll hear about that as EBF, the evidence-based funding formula. That formula was a great improvement, but what it took to pass it, as far as we were told as citizens on the ground, was including this new voucher program into law. And it was intended to be temporary. It had a sunset clause. It was supposed to finish after 5 school years. That 5th school year is now, and it's already been extended for an additional one. In addition, so it was really, at the time of its creation, like for a brand new voucher program in the US, it was really one of the biggest at the outset. So it can be per year as large as $100 million in vouchers, which is the equivalent of diverting $75 million in revenue from the general revenue fund. It hasn't actually been maxed out in terms of the donations to this point in the program. So last year it was actually smaller than that. It was about $75 million was given to the scholarship granting organizations. And that is the equivalent of $56 million then were given in tax credits for that. It's about 9,000 students last year at more than 470 schools. And as Diane mentioned, 95% of the schools participating are religious schools. The program is administered by the Department of Revenue. So a lot of the data about the program goes through there, but schools that are participating have to be registered with the State Board of Ed and then recognized. And so it's the responsibility of the State Board of Ed to approve and monitor those schools to the extent that monitoring is happening. So there are a whole slew of problems with school vouchers, and these really apply to any type of voucher, whether you're talking about ESAs, tax credit scholarships, or the traditional vouchers. And so I'm going to kind of zoom through this list and then go into detail a little bit more after this with the problems. So, you know, a crucial thing is that you are diverting public funds, and in Illinois, our public schools are underfunded. Many of our public services and public goods are underfunded. And so that's a huge issue to be siphoning off money that way. We're using taxpayer funds for religious purposes, violating the separation of church and state, as we mentioned above. There's a real decrease in transparency and oversight of public spending once it's handed over to the private sector. And as you'll see a little bit later, that's a really significant problem for the schools getting vouchers in Illinois. There's a decrease in protection of student civil rights and their access to appropriate public education. Compliance with anti-discrimination laws is very weak or non-existent, and there's unfortunately a lack of oversight. It exacerbates this. Voucher programs don't improve academic outcomes. In many states, we are now seeing research that shows that not only do they not improve them, they may worsen them and may worsen them quite a bit. And finally, vouchers have been long known to increase segregation by race, class, and disability. They were really devised as a program after Brown versus Board of Education to essentially allow especially Southern communities to continue to segregate their schools by race. And that's really the history of vouchers in the US. And as we see now, we'll talk about a little later, they're really a policy that decreases education equity overall and does not increase it. So a little more detail about our underfunded public schools and how we are taking money away from that. So this evidence-based funding model that I talked about a little bit earlier that was created in 2017. This was a great improvement for how we fund public schools in Illinois. Instead of just, in fact, in the past, we were giving districts who could fund themselves more money. Now we're really looking at how much does a school and district need to educate the children who are coming in its door, and what ability does that community have to provide that via local property taxes. And the formula takes that into account. So the original goal was to get every district and school to 90% adequacy within 10 years. That would have been 2027. We are only 4 years away from that, and we are very distant. The state was supposed to increase funding each year by at least $350 million. But that really, like, if they only did that minimum, we wouldn't get to adequacy for several decades still. And, we'd really need to be adding actually about $1 billion a year for the next 4 years to get to adequacy, 90% adequacy. And yet we are in Springfield every year, along with, many public ed advocacy orgs, and, begging and, making pleas for adding $350 million a year. And yet at the same time, you can see last year, we diverted $56 million to 9,000 kids in private schools. So that's really problematic. Vouchers are being used, our public dollars are going to fund religious purposes, as we said before. The Supreme Court rulings in recent years have really weakened the legal basis for the separation of church and state, but that doesn't actually weaken the fundamental principle that, this is something that's underlying our government, that we want the separation of church and state. It's crucial for, a successful multicultural democratic society to have this separation, and voucher programs that are funding religious schools really violate this. This is about the oversight and transparency. State and federal laws really require a lot of transparency and oversight and accountability for our public schools. You can find out a ton of information about every public school in Illinois really quite easily. The academic outcomes, enrollment, discipline policies, discipline statistics. You can find out about budget and spending. You can get a list of employees and find out their pay and their qualifications. You can find, lists of contracts and actually copies of the contracts, so if schools and districts are, paying third parties who it's going to. But for private schools, even those accepting these voucher funds, that's really not the case. They have to share very minimal info with the State Board of Ed. In fact, some of the information they should be sharing and that the State Board of Ed should be sharing with the public is still not available. There's almost nothing about actually, how schools are operating, what contracts they're getting, really any details about their instruction and curriculum. And so a school has to first register with the state and then be recognized. But after that process is done, in order to receive these vouchers, there's, an initial on-site visit, but there's not a whole lot of oversight after that. It's really minimal. And that is, really a problematic way when you're spending tax dollars. This, I think, is just a really key issue in Illinois with Invest in Kids, that vouchers are funding discrimination, and these schools are not open to all kids. There's discrimination happening on really the basis of so many protected categories. It takes a very cursory look at schools' websites and handbooks that are getting vouchers to find just absolutely crystal clear examples in black and white of discrimination on the basis of religion, on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation, parenting and pregnancy status, national origin, in particular support for families with limited English proficiency or students who are English language learners, And also disability status, either, not actually accommodating all students with all disabilities, or not allowing students with disabilities to fully participate. So we just have a few examples here. Unfortunately, there are a whole lot more. Here's an example of discrimination on the basis of pregnancy status at Rockford Christian schools. This is a Title IX violation. If you have had a child or you become pregnant, you can't attend. Here's an example of LGBTQ+ status of students and families. You are not even allowed to apply to Timothy Christian schools if you are, two gay parents, a transgender child. Timothy Christian is not for you. Here's an example from a Catholic school in the North Shore. You need to have your baptismal record on file, and the school is going to help you in the sacramental preparation of your child once they're enrolled. And a final example, here's an example of students with mental health conditions aren't allowed to participate in field trips. And also even just, physical conditions will be allowed to. This is at Wheaton Academy out in the western suburbs. So we could offer a whole lot more very concerning examples here, but we will move on to the fact that vouchers don't improve academic outcomes. Really, there is just no evidence from decades of studies that voucher students outperform demographically matched public school counterparts. And even worse, in more recent long-term studies, DC, Indiana, Louisiana, Ohio, there is a lot of evidence that voucher recipients are actually faring worse in terms of graduation rates and test scores. This is one of the major rhetorical arguments for vouchers, that they are, allowing families to rescue their children from failing schools and place them into more successful private programs. Unfortunately, that is just, the evidence does not bear that out. A lot of the pro voucher research, really the bulk of it, is from a small set of researchers who have direct ties to DeVos, the Koch brothers, the Waltons, and other privatizers that we were talking about at the beginning of this presentation. The truth is, for Illinois voucher recipients, even though we're in the 5th year of this program and the law requires kids getting vouchers to take the same state test that kids in public school will take, that data is not available from ISB. It's not on their website. If you ask them, they don't have it. It's not ready. I don't know where it is. So sort of summing up a lot of those, vouchers are not a pro-equity policy. They decrease civil rights protections and increase discrimination. They worsen academic outcomes. In truth, the poorest students can't even participate in the programs for a variety of reasons, because for one, the full cost of many of these schools is not covered. And there's additional costs for attending some of these schools that are not part of a tuition thing that a scholarship would cover. In Illinois, we don't have stats on this, but really, as we look at voucher programs around the country, many voucher students would never have attended public schools in the first place. So these are not really, these are not children who are being rescued. These are children who were in private school or going to go to private school in any case, and now just have it subsidized. Ultimately, we have 1.8 million kids in Illinois public schools. 90% of them are in underfunded schools that are not at 90% adequacy. And almost half of our K-12 population is low income. So what equity is serving all those kids in public schools. And that's the majority of the school-age children in our state. Meanwhile, the Illinois Invest in Kids voucher program is serving 9,000 kids and siphoned off 56 million public tax dollars last year. So it comes down to research is showing that public schools do a better job of educating low-income students. why are we diverting public tax dollars to subsidize private school enrollment? That's not going to improve academic outcomes. It's not going to increase equity. That's not good public policy, and it's not a good use of public funds. So who's in favor of Invest in Kids? Diane talked about this a little bit earlier. There's really a very well-funded lobby to make the Invest in Kids Act permanent, to remove that sunset clause, and to expand the program so that there would be 100% credit and 75% credit for the donors, well, contributors. That the whole program would have higher limits overall, so bigger than just $100 million maximum, and would have more students. So the thing is, with this lobby, the scholarship granting organizations themselves get 5% of the contributions. So kind of 5% off the top of the money coming in for vouchers for their operating expenses. And one of those operating expenses is lobbying. So on here, the Big Shoulders Fund and Empower Illinois are the biggest SGOs, and they're doing a lot of lobbying, and they have a lot of money to do that. So in the last 2021-2022 cycle, Empower Illinois, could use up to $2.4 million from the voucher money they were getting for their operations. As a little side note, the main Empower Illinois lobbyist is Juan Rangel. So I think many people remember his name from the privatization of Chicago Public Schools and the scandals he was involved in back in the past decade. And now he's back in Springfield lobbying for a different privatization scheme. Groups that weren't on the scene when this was passed that are now here, who are trying to keep this program and make it bigger, include DeVos's American Federation for Children and their associated PAC, Illinois Federation for Children. That PAC has already, it only was created back in March this year. It's already spent $700,000 in just the primary and the general election cycles. And they want not just vouchers and tax credit scholarships, but they want things like education savings account, which are an even broader diversion and use of money for private purposes. So what's next for Invest in Kids? As I said, it's already been extended 1 year. And so the timeline on that, it was written initially with a January 1st, 2024 sunset date. Now that date is the 1st of January in 2025. So the final school year would be 2023-2024. If it is to be extended, that extension really needs to be voted on within the next year, because basically if there's going to be an additional school year, vouchers start being awarded in the February before that school year. So, the General Assembly really has about 12 months to get this done. The previous extension votes happened quite a bit before February 2023. So we can expect that a vote to extend this could happen as early as lame duck, like a month from now, or it could happen sometime in the spring session. And so certainly the pro-voucher lobby has been extremely active in Springfield for many years, and they've really ramped it up recently. So to oppose that, Illinois Families for Public Schools has been initiated a campaign, Game Over for Illinois Vouchers. We have been talking to a ton of other community organizations, advocacy organizations, the state teacher unions, school management organizations are represented here. And they have signed on to also to ask for the General Assembly to sunset Invest in Kids permanently. So what can we all do together? So first, one thing we can all do is make sure our state senator and our state rep and Governor Pritzker have heard from us. They need to know that you're a constituent, that the Invest in Kids program needs to sunset permanently. And you need to ask, can you count on them to oppose any extension or expansion of this program? Really, a big issue is that part of the extension votes have been snuck into bigger bills and big budget bills. So that makes it really hard for legislators to vote no, very much in the way that the program was created in the first place, where it was essentially tucked in to the education funding formula redo. So as Diane mentioned previously, Governor Pritzker was a very staunch opponent of vouchers and this particular tax credit scholarship voucher. House Speaker Creswell and Senate President Don Harmon also were publicly opposed to any creation of voucher programs back in 2017 when we were doing some organizing after President Trump came into office and Bruce Rauner was really pushing for vouchers. We had helped organize a bunch of legislators to write a letter to Rauner at the time, and Welch and Harmon were both signatories of that. And recently Pritzker sort of changed his tune. If you look at his answers to the Sun-Times back in October for a candidate questionnaire, it's kind of, he catches some limited support, which I think is really problematic. And it would be great if he was hearing from people who did not want to see this program grow and want to see it end. There's a whole lot of other little steps here. You can sign up on our website to get involved. We will share this slideshow so you have the links in here. And we will return to Springfield. We were there for veto session and we are going to be there for lame duck. It is while school is not in session. So if you're a school age parent, this is a delightful time to see Central Illinois in early January and lobby for public schools. You can share information. We have a short FAQ that's a lot faster than this slide presentation on our website. If you are part of a community or an issue advocacy org that hasn't endorsed sunsetting Invest in Kids, we would love to add you to that list. And we are happy to present this information or a little shorter version to community groups or house parties or whoever wants to know about this. Unfortunately, I think there's just such limited knowledge that Illinois has a voucher program like this. It is not huge compared to what our neighbors in Wisconsin and Indiana have. But as we have seen in Wisconsin and Indiana and elsewhere, these things balloon and just metastasize over time. And it really, we are not doing what we need to do for public schools and for public goods in Illinois in general. And it's really, this is bad public policy. And it's not actually helping the 1.8 million kids in public schools in Illinois.